Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my review of a lens that really has been missing from Fuji's medium format GFX lineup, and that is what is often called a kit lens. A lens that does a little bit of everything, kind of a jack of all trades, and is typically sold paired with a camera body, often at a discounted price if bought with the camera. That lens, the GF 35-70mm F4.5-5.6 WR, has released along with the new GFX 50S Mark II. Now, kit lenses are rarely a sexy lens in terms of having some exotic feature to them, one particular thing that they do very well. But typically where their advantage is that they do a fair number of things fairly well with some versatility. And of course that's true here with a lens that goes moderately wide, about a 28mm full frame equivalent, and out a little past normal, about 55mm of a full frame equivalent. And so it covers some very important focal lengths from 28mm to 35mm to 50mm with a little bit extra there. And so this is a lens that can do a variety of things, including landscapes. It can be used for some portrait settings, but also just for those general purpose things that kit lenses are so often used for. And if you buy it in kit with the camera itself, you're only paying about $500 for the lens, which offers up a pretty strong value for anything in the medium format universe where gear tends to be quite expensive. So today we're going to break down its performance in terms of its build and its features. We'll take a look at its autofocus and a detailed look at its image quality. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Today's episode is sponsored by NordVPN, the VPN recommended by top technology experts. Due to the pandemic, we are all online more than ever, and that means our precious data is even more at risk. NordVPN anonymizes your browsing data, protects your personal information, and even enables you to access content blocked in certain regions. Using NordVPN is incredibly simple, with apps for all your devices that allow you to get protected with literally just the click of a button. And with over 5,000 servers in 60 countries worldwide, it is easy to get protection without compromising speed. Visit nordvpn.com/Dustin or use coupon code Dustin to get a special discount on the VPN I've been personally using for years. The GF 35-70mm is a fairly typical kit design in that it's not particularly high-end construction, though it does have the WR or weather resistance weather sealing as a part of the design. It is relatively compact and lightweight, weighing in at only 440 grams. It is about 85 millimeters in diameter, but only 74 millimeters in length, though it is a retractable zoom design, and if you're going to fully extend it out, its maximum extension is going to be 96.4 millimeters, a little bit longer in length. Our front filter size is 62 millimeters. Inside we have 9 rounded aperture blades. There are no switches or rings on the exterior of the lens, no aperture ring, for example, no AF/MF switch. This is a fairly bare bones design, though fortunately, as we'll see in just a moment, the optics help to make up for that. If you buy the lens individually, its price is quite high at $1,000 US, but its value really increases if you buy it in kit, where the price difference drops to about $500. And at that price, I would say that it offers up a good value.
So let's talk autofocus. The lens is equipped with an STM or stepping motor, and in this case it's a little bit difficult for me because I can't really dissect the lens autofocus performance out from the autofocus performance of the camera I'm testing it on. And in this case, the autofocus system is a fairly primitive old one, only 117 contrast AF points, no phase detect AF points at all. And so it's certainly not my favorite focus system. It's not even anywhere near the top 50. But what I can say is that I was also taking a look at the 110mm f2 lens at the same time. That lens has a linear focus motor, so more of a premium focus motor, and frankly I would say that this focus system seemed to get things done a little bit more effortlessly than what the linear focus motor did in the 110mm f2. Partly that's because this is a less demanding focal range and aperture combination, and so there's not as much stress put on the focus system, but I suspect the other part of it is that it's newer. And in this case, it got the job done, though I do have a few reservations. Again, I can't decouple those reservations from the focus system itself. I will say that I had some of the resistance to focus on close subjects sometimes, and so where I wanted to focus and get this result, it wouldn't focus on the close result, and so I got this result instead. And so obviously that is not going to be preferable. And when I used it for portraits, I found that IAF didn't always want to grab, and so some of my portrait shots with the lens are a little bit soft, but if I look carefully at them, I can see that the focus is actually on a little bit more distant subject rather than on the main subject itself, even though, in theory, IAF, was trying to grab on there. So I suspect you will get better focus results if you are using this on something like the 100S or the GFX 100. Of course, the problem is that you're probably less likely to use them on those cameras right now because those are higher end cameras, and this lens is really designed to be sold with the less expensive camera model. And so autofocus seems to be okay, but there are so many limits to the autofocus system that it only gives me a okay performance in general. Fortunately, I was more impressed when it comes to the image quality. And we're going to take a deep dive into image quality performance, and so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Let's take a look.
So as expected, the most amount of vignette and distortion is on the wide end at 35mm, where there is a noticeable amount of barrel distortion, though fortunately Fuji's corrections tend to be very good. And so, for example, here you can see the auto-corrected result, and most of those things clear up very nicely. However, to give you a breakdown of what's happening there, I did a manual correction, a +13, a nice linear correction there, and so there's no complexity to the distortion. That's good. A fairly moderately heavy amount of vignette. I have nearly a +70 applied there, so a good 3 stops of vignette in the corners. However, again, it clears up pretty nicely. Now, as we move on through the zoom range, there's really not a lot to see here. Basically, no distortion at around 50mm and a little bit less vignette. If I move on to 70mm, we can see still basically next to no distortion, probably a fraction of a degree of a pincushion, not enough to correct though, and a vignette remains fairly light. So overall, no major misstep, just a little bit of heavy barrel distortion in vignette wide open, but nothing critical. I also didn't see anything too critical when it came to chromatic aberrations, and so if we look for longitudinal chromatic aberrations, sure, we can see a little bit of fringing here on these out-of-focus pine needles. Not a whole lot before the plane of focus, but overall, nothing really critical there as noted. Likewise, if we look for lateral chromatic aberrations near the edge of the frame, I don't really see much going on here either, and so overall positive results there. Since the 35-70 is releasing as a kit lens for the GFX 50S Mark II, that's where I'm going to be reviewing it. So it's a 50 megapixel sensor. One note before we get going is that my chart is set up for the more typical 3:2 crop factor or native ratio of most other full frame APS-C cameras, and so not for the 4:3 ratio of this medium format sensor. So you'll see everything doesn't line up perfectly, but that shouldn't thwart us here. So at 200%, we can see in the middle of the frame that sharpness and contrast are really very good. We can see a fair bit of moire, and so that is not something that's necessarily well corrected. That was the case too with the GFX 100 sensor as well. Mid-frame looks fantastic, very crisp, very sharp, and if we look on down into the corner, we can see that there is some drop-off in contrast here, though there still is a pretty decent amount of resolution. Stopping down to f5.6 does give us some additional contrast and a little more resolution there. And stopping on down to f8 gives us just a hair more, though we're quickly coming up against the diffraction limit, and so that's about as good as what we're going to see. We can see if we move back to the middle of the frame that, if anything, I would say f5.6 is just as sharp, and moving over here to the mid-frame on the other side, we can see that that is roughly the same. So you're going to get your peak sharpness somewhere between f5.6 and f8, and if you go beyond that point, you'll see no increased sharpness and also a little bit of less contrast due to diffraction here at f11. And you can stop all the way down to f32, but you can see that diffraction has really limited your contrast and ability to resolve fine details by that point. Now, if we move on to 42mm-ish, and Fuji's a little bit unique in that they do give you the decimal point there, but maximum aperture is now f5, and so comparing f5 and f5.6, we can see that once again in the center of the frame that contrast and resolution is very, very good, getting slightly better in terms of contrast at f5.6. Mid-frame is also very good, though not as excellent as we saw at 35mm. We can see that there is a very slight improvement at f5.6. Looking down into the corner, we can see about the same result wide open with a little bit more improvement at f5.6. with some further improvement to be found at f8. And so I do find that the lens has the capability of sharpening up even more in the corners here at f8 relative to 35mm. So the next mark position on the zoom range is actually a somewhat odd 63mm, and you can see that I didn't quite line up perfectly on that. Also odd is our maximum aperture of f5.4, which is actually not a selectable aperture, and so it's just kind of quirky in that sense. We can see looking in the center of the frame that we're not quite as high contrast as what we have seen previously. Surprisingly, although it's just a fraction of a stop down to f5.6, we do have a little bit of improvement, so that's well worth doing. Mid-frame, again, it's good, but it's not exceptionally good like we saw a little bit earlier on. And if we move off into the corner, we can see that it is considerably softer here relative to what we saw earlier on, with definite lower contrast. Stopping down to f8 makes a huge improvement. So if you're wanting to get sharpness across the frame, definitely shoot at f8 at in and around the 63mm focal length. So when we arrive at the end of the zoom range, we have a maximum aperture of f5.6 at 70mm, and so first time we were kind of on a full stop here for a while. So we can see here that, again, in the center of the frame, it's not as sharp as what it was at the 35mm end. Stopping down to f8 does make a significant improvement, however. We can find that that's true also in the mid-frame, which is noticeably better, stopped down to f8. And if we look down into the corner, the same is true, where there is a huge uptick in contrast and resolution to where it really looks quite excellent right out to the edge of the frame at f8. So shooting at landscape apertures in the real world results in really fantastic looking results. So here at a pixel level, I'm seeing good resolution and contrast all across the frame. These Fuji medium format sensors really are great, and you can just see, how beautiful a result you can get here at f8. Returning to this image for a moment, we can see if we zoom into the area of focus, we can just see great detail and contrast. And so this lens does have the chops, particularly if you stop it down a bit, to give you great landscape type results. And so it's well worth its asking price, particularly if you get it in kit. Now, obviously, a lens with a maximum aperture of f5.6 at the long end is never going to be a world beater, though remember that because of the medium format, depth of field is shallower at f5.6 than what it would be on full frame, certainly what you would see on APS-C. Byproduct is you can still blur out some backgrounds if you get close to your subject, as we can see here. Here's another one that shows that if you get close to minimum focus distance, you really can blur out the background quite nicely. Now you can get fairly close on the telephoto end, down as close as 35 centimeters, which gives you, as you can see, a very useful 0.28 times magnification. And so there certainly are many applications for that. A close-up performance contrast isn't particularly strong, as you can see. So you may want to stop down a little bit if you want to achieve maximum contrast, as there's a little bit of like that Vaseline smear look to close-up image quality. Now the lens can be used for portraits, so it's not going to dramatically blur out a background. Even here wide open, you can see that detail isn't perfect, but I don't know that focus is perfect either. And so it seems like to me that focus is a little bit beyond the subject, and obviously that's one of the downsides of the focus system in the 50S Mark II. Here at 70 millimeters, your capability of blurring out the background is a little bit higher, and you can see that detail on my subject subject's face is a little bit better. The quality of the bokeh here is only okay in this situation, and I do see a bit more of some harder edges than what I would like there in the background. But as you can see, it certainly is a usable image, and I certainly would use it for that if I owned the lens. Where I think the lens shines the most, though, is for these landscape type scenes, making it a nice kind of walk around lens. It's relatively lightweight, and the versatility of the focal length means that you get some options when you're framing a scene. And of course, when paired with any of these cameras, which have such great resolution, you can get very highly detailed images. On the wide end, I felt like flare resistance was fairly good here. You can see no ghosting artifacts, even though we have bright sun. I stopped down to f11. This is just some rising kind of, not smoke, but actually heat waves. It's a very cold day, and so the dryer was going where I was shooting. And so you can see a little bit more of those just kind of prismatic burst up here, but nothing that's destructive to the image. On the telephoto end, you can see that still contrast is holding up good, no real flare artifacts, and stop down to f11, less distinct in terms of the sunburst effect, and there is a little bit of ghosting artifacts that you can see here in the tree, but again, it's not anything huge, and so overall the lens gives a pretty decent optical performance for being an inexpensive kit lens.
And so at the end of the day, as I said, this is not a lens that probably anybody is going to get too excited about, but it is a very important lens. For one thing, if you're considering moving into the Fujifilm GFX system, good chance you don't have any gear there already. And so what a lens like this allows you to do is to, maybe if you just have enough money to buy the camera and the lens, it gives you something to shoot with for a while until your budget extends to the place where maybe you can add a little bit more exotic glass to your kit. And many people find that, this lens versatility means that even when they have maybe some prime lenses to supplement it, they still continue to use it because it's compact, it's lightweight, it's easy to bring along, and so it's just a lens that ends up being used. And the fact that you can get it for a fairly strong value in kit is going to help it as well, I think, for a lot of people that are considering moving into the system. And so this is not a bad kit lens at all. I mean, there's nothing particularly amazing about it. It's not like the best kit lens that I've ever seen, but it's far from the worst either. And it's optically good enough that it, particularly at smaller apertures, that it can hold up to these very demanding medium format system sensors and really give us some amazing looking images. And I certainly got images that I would be proud to share in any kind of setting from this lens and this camera combination. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my text review, also to an image gallery if you want to go check out more of these photos or look at them a little more closely. There are some buying links there if you'd like to purchase either the lens or the combination there as well, and be sure to check out my review of the GFX 50S Mark II as well. There's also linkage to follow myself or Craig on social media, or to take a look at our new channel and subscribe there. Also links to become a patron, to buy some channel merchandise, and of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube, and be sure to ring the bell so you get notification when new content drops. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.